Hello everybody. So finally this is my rear diff rebuilding video. By the way, my channel name has been changed to Ninja Mechanics, and so now I finally got all the parts. I got all the carrier bearings and pinion bearings and pinion seal, and also oil retaining ring from a local Toyota dealer. Okay, and my ring and pinion gear itself was in good shape, so I decided not to change the gear itself. So I'll be just doing the pinion bearings with the carrier bearings as well. Okay, so I'll be getting ready. So you're gonna have to disconnect the e-brake cable, and ABS wheel speed sensor needs to come off, and you have to disconnect the brake line as well. And then 4 axle bearing nuts, and then you should be able to just pull out the axle partially, probably about good 5-6, maybe probably about 6 inch. If you pull out, you can disengage it from your diff. So you do that axle pull out for left and right, and then your diff should be ready to come out. And then you also have two for your if you have a diff lock option, you have a 2 diff lock actuator and position sensor, and also a breather line you have to disconnect. You got like 11 nuts to take out a differential itself. And at this point you probably have to do rear sway bar removal. You have to take that out, and also ideally, if you could take out the diff lock actuator, if you do have a diff lock, I would just remove that as well before pulling it out, because the fuel tank right behind it really gets in the way. I did remove it without taking out the diff lock actuator, but it would have been a lot easier if I did. So that's the diff that came out. And then first thing you want to do is to mark all that carrier bearing clamps on them. So you could do whatever pattern or number of punches you like, just to make sure it goes back to where it came from. And then just as a reference, I wanted to double check the backlash on the ring pinion. They're about 0.2 mil. I only have a metric dial indicator, so all the numbers I'm gonna mention is all in metric. And then some bit of a gear marking compound just to make sure the ring pinion gear bite is in correct spot. I ended up using the white lithium grease to show gear marking. Yeah, and then the yellow one wasn't really available in the local store, so yeah, it kind of works. So that clamp pulls it off, and then you can pull out the carrier bearings. And then that's a fork for the lock. Your pinion outer bearing is usually goes bad on this thing. But I'll be changing all the bearings, so I'll be removing the carrier bearings first on the diff lock side. So 2-jaw puller is what I used, and I didn't have any problem taking that off. So diff lock side's done, and now on the other side, carrier bearing. So I just put you can just put a like a piece from your bearing race driver, whatever size that fits in the inner side of the bearing. And then pinion nut. I don't have the 30 mil impact socket, so I just decided to do just manually with a breaker bar. And then another, again, 2-drop puller for pulling the flange out. You can also press down on the pinion itself to take everything, but I just decided to just pull the flange out first. So, and then I'll be pressing out the pinion. You're gonna have to make sure you have a piece of 2x4 or something soft, so that you don't damage your pinion. And after this, you're gonna be removing the pinion seal. If the pinion seal is really getting stubborn, so you could probably put some penetrating oil around the outer edge. Okay, so I'm removing the inner pinion bearing, and my bearing separator like bolt snapped on me, so I ended up using just a threaded rod, which is really soft, and but somehow I managed to work it out. So this inner pinion bearing is one of the hardest bearing to remove. Yeah, so I'm using a 20-ton hydraulic press here. Yeah, yeah, for this bearing separator, you need a good quality separator, which you probably need a 4.5 inch to 5 inch capacity for the separator. Yeah, and then once that's out, and you see pinion depth spacer is stuck in there. So I'm not changing any pinion gear or ring gear, so I'm gonna maintain the same spacer as it is. If you are changing them, you're gonna have to adjust your spacer, pinion depth spacer, as you're assembling them. But yeah, I'm not going to do that this time. So the pinion seal comes out, and after this pinion seal, you're gonna have an oil slinger on top of the outer pinion. So you will have to reuse them, so you can just put that aside. See, that's the oil slinger for you to keep. And like I said, this outer pinion bearing was totally shot on me. It was all pitted, and he was really damaged. So now it's time to remove the pinion bearing races. So for the outer race, you just press out the from inside, just enough of a good size to press on the oil retaining ring. So if you push on the oil retaining ring, you should be able to remove the outer pinion race. Okay, so I got the oil retaining ring and outer pinion race removed, as you can see. And then inner pinion race. You do need probably at least 6 inch or so, 6 inch to 10 inch long punch for this, otherwise you're gonna be banging on your knuckle. So that's the inner pinion race. So this oil retaining ring, if you remove it this way, then you do have to replace them because they get mangled up as you remove them. So it was only like $7 from dealership, so it wasn't a big deal. So it's time to install the new bearing race from inner side. So when you have to seat it all the way. So when you do seat it all the way, you would either hear a different sound, and it's also obvious because your bearing driver is gonna really rebound on you really hard once you hit the bottom. So you seat it all the way in. So I got the inner pinion race installed, and then I'm gonna install the oil retaining ring first, and then outer pinion race to follow. So that's the part. Okay, now pinion inner bearing. Old crush sleeve to support the new bearing from inside. And then carrier bearing I'm pressing. So one side goes in normally with your regular bearing driver. And if you have a diff lock, so diff lock side is a little more tricky. So you use the driver to up to the flash surface, and then but you have to go deeper to seat it all the way. So you could use one of the old bearing race to push it down further or to seat it all the way. So that's what I did. Yeah, old bearings race upside down, and then big like 4-inch race driver, and a piece of cardboard just protected. And you have to make sure your other side of the carrier bearing is supported from the inner core, so you don't damage the new bearings as you're pressing this. Okay, so all the carrier bearings installed there, and then you're gonna put a new crush sleeve on the pinion. I ended up putting grease there, but then I didn't like it, so I ended up washing it off, and I went ahead with the new gear oil on the bearing, just to pre-lubricate it. So you could put another piece of 2x4s to support the pinion from inside, and then just a bunch of old spacers and old bearings to tap down the new outer pinion bearing, just enough so that you can put the flange and the flange nut by hand to begin with. Yeah, I got the outer pinion pressed partially, and then you're gonna put an oil slinger on top. And then pinion seal to follow. And just to ensure a good seal, then give it a good cleaning. And just to make sure, just to play it safe, you could probably put a silicone sealant on the outside of the pinion seal. This actually helps to slide it down easier too. And then lastly, you have to make sure to lubricate the inside of that seal as well, so they don't run dry at the start. So just a very thin layer of silicone seal gasket maker. And I just used the outer gray, I think, for this project. And again, you could use one of your old bearing race to tap it down. Then once it's close to finish, like remove that space and make sure the seal is sitting evenly. Okay, now I'm just lubricating the inside of that pinion seal. And after this, you're ready to put the flange on. And again, here, just extra caution. You could put a gasket maker in that spline. And then you can put the gear oil on the outside of that, on the outside of the spline. Yeah, and then just gently tap it down until you have enough thread for your brand new pinion nut. So, and then again, I don't have the impact socket, so I decided to just torque it down by hand with a breaker wire. So the entire thing took me about 11 turn, but from 8-9 turn, it hits about, that's where it hits the crush sleeve. So and then it gets a lot stiffer. And once you're close, it goes really fast. So just go slow, make sure, because you can't come back. Once you torque it, that's it. So you're gonna want to have a drag of about 9 to 14.5 inch pound. So once you get the pinion set up, now you're ready for carrier bearing. And this thread is very tricky to line them up with a clamp. So, if you have to spend a long time to get it right, you should. I think it's very easy to cross thread them, and if you do screw up the thread, you're basically finished. So take your time and make sure it's nice and square in there. One tips to make sure it's in properly. So you have the adjusting nut in there. And then you're gonna rest your clamp on top. Your clamp should sit perfectly without any space. So, and then on top of that, you should be able to turn the adjusting nut freely with your finger. So my diff lock side carrier bearing is good, and then onto the other side. So you could do it in various ways. You could try to put the adjusting nut first and then clamp later, or you could install the clamp partially and then try to thread on the adjusting nut later. Whatever works, but yeah, but you just want to make sure you get this right. So I got both sides mounted, and so the clamp is seated 100% and adjusting nut slides freely. Okay, now after that's done, you have to go on to carrier bearing preloading process. So what you do is to basically slide the ring gear towards the pinion until you have about 0.2 mil backlash on it, or you could simply, bring the pinion gear, ring gear all the way against the pinion gear. But according to the manual, you slide it until you have about 0.2 mil backlash. And then once you do that, you're gonna have to find zero preload point. So it's just showing you about 0.2 mil backlash there. And then you're gonna be putting the dial indicator on either ring gear, back of the ring gear, or back of the adjusting nut. And then you're gonna be tightening the pinion side adjusting plate until you see a dial indicator start moving. And just as it's about to move, that's basically your preload 0. Tighten the pinion side adjusting nut by 1 to 1.5 click. So that's your preload. And during the backlash adjustment process, you're gonna have to maintain this same preload all time. So I'm just finding 0 preload per spot, and then I'll be preloading it by 1 to 1.5 click. And then, you know, like once the backlash is all set up, your adjusting that locking plate somehow doesn't line up. You could come back to this step and then let's say if you had 1 click preload, you could try 1.5 preload, and then that should get you lined up on your last process to install the locking plate for your adjusting nut. Okay, now I got my preload set up and ready for backlash adjustment step. So backlash is about 0.13 to 0.18 mil range. So when I took the differential out, I had about 0.2 mil backlash. So that's a little bit out of spec, so I'm gonna try to bring it down to about 1.6, 1.7 backlash on them. So if you have too much backlash, you're gonna wanna bring the ring gear closer towards the pinion. Meaning, so you're gonna be loosening the pinion side first and then tightening the ring gear side. Exactly by the same amount. So you could do 1 notch, loosen, and then tighten 1 notch on the other. That way you get to keep the preload consistent. And then same thing vice versa. If you wanna squeeze the preload, you're gonna be loosening the ring gear side and then torquing the pinion side. So here I have about 0.15 mil backlash. So I'm gonna expand it a little bit more. Now here I have about 0.16, 0.17 backlash. So this is where I decided to just call it good. And then this is just a diagram of preloading process for the carry bearing. Torque the ring gear and then tighten the pinion. You can find the zero load and then 1.5 click to 1 click. So after all this, you should have a preload of about 12.8 to 19.7 inch-pound drag with a pinion and carry bearings combined. So I have about 17.5 inch-pound drag on them. And then we'll use a gear marking compound to make sure your pinion gear is biting really well. So that's the drive side and coast side. So I'm ready to now torque down the carrier bearing clamps and adjusting that locking plate. And it is a good idea to just flush out the oil on the bolt and then use a blue Loctite on them. And then I'm just torquing down evenly after applying the Loctite on them. So the torque on this guy is 63 foot-pound for the clamps. You have 4 bolts on them. And for the locking plate, for your adjusting that is 108 inch-pound torque. So you do have to do this right. Otherwise, if if these bolts ever come loose while you're driving, your diff is basically finished. So yeah, clean the bolt and apply blue thread locker and torque it to spec. after this, I'll be installing differential into the housing. So clean the mating surface really well, and I decided to just go with the outer gray gasket maker. And I kept the differential actuator off, so it's easier for me to install it. And also around the actuator, if you have a diff lock model, there's a, like the stud bolt is really long, which makes it a little harder to install it. It gets in your way. So I installed it without the longest, I think there are 2 long stud bolts. So I took the stud bolt out and decided to install it later on after the diff is actually installed. And yeah, so that makes it a lot easier. And then as you do that, your diff lock actuator is you have to make sure they're in the unlocked position, so that diff lock fork will be in the outermost position. And if you do that, your actuator should slide in and out without any problem. Okay, so, and then diff housing is pretty heavy, so you're gonna wanna have a position of almost like a bench press position. You just basically push it up and then slide it straight in horizontally. Yeah. And so diff is in, so I'm gonna be installing the diff lock actuator. So we have 11 nuts or stud bolts. Some of the studs I needed to change because they're all rusted out. Okay, and then this differential housing is 18 foot-pound torque. And then again, you're gonna have to put back the differential lock actuator and position sensor and breather housing. And then you're gonna torque down the prop shaft to 65 foot-pound on each of them. Okay, so that's the diff project. So after this, you're gonna have to slide the axle back in, and then e-brake cable attached, and then ABS speed sensor attached, and then you have to reconnect your brake housing, and then pop the air out of the brake line. You might as well start from passenger side rear, and then driver side rear, and then you're gonna do passenger side front, and then lastly driver side front to take the air out of the housing. Okay, so next project I have a water pump replacement on 1GR engine. Thank you for watching, and please make sure to subscribe. Okay, see you next time. Bye bye.